Okay, so I'd like to welcome each of you to this CITMA webinar, which is celebrating Pride. I'm incredibly excited and honoured to be hosting this panel of illustrious speakers. For those that don't know me, my name is Mark Barefoot. I'm a chartered trademark attorney and I'm Senior Legal Director, Head of IP and Brand Protection for Tommy Hilfiger Global and PVH Europe. Our plan today is to ask our panelists on the importance of Pride and what it means to them, why openness and acceptance in the profession is so important, and how we can drive greater diversity. If you have any questions for the panel, please feel free to post them in the chat, and I will put them to the panel. And with that said, I will introduce our panel. So delighted to have Al Skilton from the UK Intellectual Property Office. Al is the Senior Hearing Officer at the UK IPO and is currently on secondment to their legal team as a Senior Legal Advisor. Al is co-chair of the IPO's LGBTQ+ network, iPride, and sits on the IPO Diversity and Inclusion Steering Board. Al also sits on the Civil Service Wales LGBTQ+ group, South Wales LGBTQ+ networks chair group, which includes civil service, third sector and private companies, and also sits on the IP Out committee under the IP Inclusion umbrella. Al was shortlisted for the Pink News Role Model of the Year Award 2020 and identifies as non-binary. And can you believe at this moment in time, drilling has just started in my house? So apologies that you're hearing next, we have Lord Smith of the Intellectual Property Regulatory Board. Chris began his political career as a Labour councillor for Islington Borough, becoming a Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury in 1983. He became the first openly gay MP in the UK, coming out publicly in 1984. In 1997, he became Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, the first openly gay cabinet minister anywhere in the world. He returned to the backbenches in 2001, playing a leading role in the opposition of the Iraq War and standing down from the Commons in 2005. He now sits in the House of Lords as a non-affiliated peer. And lastly, we have Giorena Desmond of Pinson Masons. Giorena is a senior chartered trademark attorney who advises clients from across various industries, including pharmaceutical, media, travel, food and beverages, and retail in contentious and non-contentious trademark design and copyright matters. She manages and prosecutes global trademark design and domain name portfolios, conducts clearance searches and advises on the adoption of new brands. Giorena is an active member of the CITMA Council and also on a number of committees such as the Women in IP and IP Out. She is also a Stonewall education role model. I'm gonna kick off quickly and introduce and ask the panel if they could explain to us what Pride means to them. So Al, do you want to kick off? And I'm going to quickly try and find a different room.
No problem. Good luck with that, Mark. Okay, well, by way of a little bit of background, I've been an activist on what used to be termed gay rights since 1988, when Section 28 was passed and I was 16, and that became a really groundbreaking and horrific piece of legislation for me as a school child at that age. I came out when I was 19, initially as a lesbian. It took me then until I was 46 to come out as non-binary, so I've had to come out twice. And really, for me, I think Pride is about celebrating some of those successes that we've had, because we've had a lot of them, but also protecting them and thinking about the things that we still need to do, because it's a good time to think about all of that. And it's also just about being with other LGBTQ people en masse as well, which I always find really inspirational, whether it's in panels in a work context or in a Pride March context. And I was, if for anyone who's seen the Pride film, the scene where the young character first walks onto the street in London at their first Pride, that is exactly what happened to me, and I cried when I watched that film. And I've cried at 2 films in my life. The other one was Philadelphia with Tom Hanks, so it's a pretty big hurdle to get over. But that was a really significant moment for me to think I've only ever known me, and now I'm seeing thousands of people in one place. So I've never lost that. Every Pride is the same for me, is still that, wow, there's so many of us, which is just brilliant. And then you feel you can conquer the world for 10 minutes until you watch the next news report. So it's all of those things for me, all tied up at once, I think. But at the moment, particularly protecting what we've got, I think, is my main message at the moment, as well as keeping on with those things. I don't know who Mark was going to come to next. I think it was you, Chris, he said earlier, for your what does Pride mean to you?
Okay, we will be on autopilot for a little while,
Yeah.
without Mark. I have to say, for me, Pride is all about enabling people to feel totally confident about who they are. And it's something that's incredibly important in any setting, be it a workplace setting, a family setting, a setting with friends. Being able to be proud about yourself, to be proud about difference, and the rich range of differences that make up a good and healthy society. For me, I came out publicly way back in 1984. I had just been elected as an MP in the previous year. I was invited to go and speak at a rally in Rugby, because Rugby City Council had taken a decision. They'd just changed political control, and they'd taken a decision that they were going to remove sexual orientation from the list of things they would not discriminate against in their employment policy. So effectively, they were saying, we do not want LGBT people coming to work for Rugby Council. There was a big march on a Saturday lunchtime through the city centre, followed by a rally in a community hall. And I'd been invited to go and speak. I remember walking into the hall. The meeting had already started. There were about 1,000 people there. And as I walked up onto the platform, I suddenly thought, this is the most appropriate moment for me to say something about myself, because the issue here is all about how people, no matter what their sexual orientation happens to be able to do an equally good job as anyone else working for Rugby Council. And I thought exactly the same thing actually applies to MPs. And so I began my speech. I stood up, I said, my name's Chris Smith. I'm the Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury, and I'm gay. At which point the entire hall got to its feet and gave me a standing ovation. I have to say it's the only time in my life I've ever had a standing ovation 30 seconds into a speech. But it was a moment I have never regretted since, because I believed then, and I have believed ever since, that being able to stand up and say who you are and be proud about who you are matters, whether you're a member of Parliament, whether you're someone working for Rugby Council, or whether you are a trademark attorney. And I hope that what I did back then has helped just a tiny little bit to make the environment easier for people to follow in my footsteps.
Thank you, Chris. And Trina?
Thanks, Mark. Well, Pride for me is all about acceptance. I had a similar experience to Al when I turned up at Pride after growing up in Ireland. I moved here when I was 16 and went to university here, and realized I was gay and kind of accepted. I mean, I knew it in Ireland, but I kind of thought, oh, I'll just brush it under the carpet. And, you know, I want to be a mum someday, and I'm sure it's impossible if you're a lesbian, so I'll just ignore it. And yeah, so I did have a relationship in university, but then, like a lot of people, unfortunately, kind of went back in the closet when I joined the workforce. And when I did join the IP field, unfortunately, I did hear a number of kind of homophobic comments, and I could tell, you know, being gay wasn't exactly accepted with open arms. So I just decided not to do anything. And it's funny, say 10 years ago, I was, you know, not out at all. And then 5 years ago, you know, in the interim, I'd got married and had a baby, and I hadn't told, you know, most people who I'd worked with. I hadn't even told my boss. And it was only after I got married that I realized, because of social media, my boss would find out through other colleagues. And I thought, okay, I have to tell him. And then I realized, oh, you know, sometimes it's kind of, it's harder. You think you'll get negative reaction, and, you know, a lot of the time it was fine. But then sometimes other people in, you know, who didn't know I was gay would say homophobic things, and it did, you know, didn't kind of rest well. But then I kind of waited and waited for other people to come out in the field of trademarks, and there were some guys, you know, like Mark and others, of course, trademark attorneys, and it was like, great. And I was like, okay, surely there's other women who'll come out. And then I just waited and waited, and then unfortunately it didn't kind of happen. So that's why kind of part of the reason why I'm here today, because I'm still waiting to, there must be other lesbian trademark attorneys out there, but it's sad, I think, that they obviously don't feel comfortable and are worried about coming out. So yeah, I think from now it feels like, you know, where I work now, it's absolutely, you know, on the first day I joined, I put a picture of my wife and my son on the desk, the three of us, and, you know, said it straight away, this is me. And yeah, it was kind of, it's amazing the difference when you can bring your whole self to work as well. It really does change. You know, I gave my now wife, I gave her an alter ego. I called her name's Sonia, but I used to call her Sam and pretend she was a guy. And I, you know, frequently mess up and get the pronoun wrong, or, you know, people would sometimes go, remember once she sent me flowers and a lovely Valentine's gift, and someone said, oh, your boyfriend's too good at gifts, it must be a girl. So just things like that you kind of realize you're not always keeping up the facade very well, but you try and avoid, you know, those Monday morning conversations, what you did at the weekend, because you think, oh, I'm going to mess it up. But yeah, but Pride itself, you know, going to Pride over the years as well, it's been great. I used to go with friends and think, wow, this is great. And the only day that I kind of hold my girlfriend, now wife's, hand is like, and think, okay, no one is going to say anything, or I'm not going to feel uncomfortable. And then I used to take our son, you know, and the dads would come as well, and we'd go as a family, and it was great. And, you know, our son loves it. And now 2 years ago, I got an opportunity to walk in Pride with my wife and son, you know, with clients, and that was fantastic as well. And my son absolutely enjoyed it. And, you know, he normally goes, oh, are we going with the gays? And, you know, has this kind of sometimes almost negative thing about, not really negative, but, you know, he's like, oh, gays can be boring or whatever. But, you know, on Pride Day, you know, he went into school on Monday saying, you know, I walked down the centre of London, and, you know, everyone was cheering and clapping, and it's because of my family. And that, you know, that was, you know, something that he'll keep forever. But yeah, so Pride means a lot on various different levels.
Thank you. So I think it's important that we explore kind of as a panel, like, how can we create a more inclusive and supportive workplace for LGBTQ+ colleagues? Because we know that, you know, to drive diversity, we first have to be inclusive. And, you know, I think that's, if we look right now, kind of where we are as a profession, you know, I think the best marker for that is the IPREG diversity survey, and obviously they put, you know, the 2020 or the 2021 survey results were published a few months ago. So Chris, do you want to give us a little introduction into the survey and perhaps talk a little bit about some of the results from there?
Yes, it was an exercise we wanted to do, because the promotion of diversity within the profession is something that we feel is important for IPREG to do. We were quite pleased that we had a 37% response rate. Slightly higher response rate, I have to say, for patent attorneys than for trademark attorneys. But we hope that in succeeding years, because we want to do this each year and to have a look at the trends that the succession of years may reveal, we hope that in succeeding years we will get a higher take-up rate. There were interesting statistics that emerged. The LGBT plus information, it was of course entirely voluntary for people to say if they wanted to identify as such. Whether those represented slightly lower percentage figures than we might have anticipated is an interesting question. We simply don't know what the answer to that is. The two things that particularly stood out for me in the results from the survey, one was the relatively high proportion of the profession who have caring responsibilities, primarily caring responsibilities for children. And that means we need to put more thought into how we handle continuing professional development, people who might want or need to take career breaks and so on. We need to think through some of the consequences of that. The other rather remarkable figure that emerged was the number of people within the profession for whom they were the first person in their family to go to university. And the percentage was quite high on that. And that I thought was a rather hopeful statistic, because it means that we are drawing into the profession people from a wide range of different backgrounds. So some very interesting thinking emerging from that survey. We will know a lot more over succeeding years as we get more information in from it.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And so going back to the original sort of point around sort of how do we create that more inclusive and supportive workplace, Al, do you want to perhaps talk a little bit about what the UKIP are doing here in this space?
Yeah, we've done a lot of recruitment lately, particularly COVID-based and post-Brexit. So we have recruited an enormous number of staff, hearing officers and trademark examiners and support staff on both sides of the house as well. And it was decided that we would use all of these mass recruitments as a way of trying to recruit differently. And COVID's obviously helped, because we now recruit sort of geographically blind, whereas we never did before. It was M4 corridor really. So being able to open up more widely geographically, I think, makes a difference anyway. So I'm not saying that all of the differences are because of the change of recruitment policy necessarily. But it was decided that for each area, instead of just using the civil service standard recruitment, we would actually look at what would suit that role better to get the people in that we wanted to get. We've got a very low percentage of BAME staff, low percentage of LGBT plus staff, higher carers, definitely, as Chris said, the carer responsibilities quite high. We're also working on social mobility at the moment to see where our staff are coming from. At one time, I was one of the few who was the first in my family to go to university, but there's actually a lot more of us now. But it had been a lot of Oxbridge hearing officers and people who'd come from that long line, whereas that's not happening as much now. But we essentially thought, okay, what skills do we need and how can we find them without necessarily using traditional recruitment methods? So we've definitely altered the language used in the adverts to attract a broader range of people. We worked with some external organisations on that, some charities, because I think the way we wrote before very much attracted a particular type of candidate. So we've tried to alter that. It does seem to have worked as well. And advertising in different places, you know, not just going to the same trade journals all the time, but advertising within communities and more broadly. Social media helps as well, because we've got quite big social media channels. So getting staff to share things within their own social media networks as well. So all of those things have led to quite a bit more diversity, especially within the hearing officer pool, which is obviously where I am. There's 30 of us now or thereabouts. And it's a much better mix of people, different backgrounds, different protected characteristics. So it does seem to be working. But still the self-declaration rates are not as high as we would like. So that is still something we're very much working on within the office. But I'm sure we're going to come on to something about that later, so I won't say too much about that now. But I think be creative in how you recruit is a really important thing. And obviously once people get there, then you need an inclusive workplace, but I know we're going to talk about that, so I won't preempt Mark's questions by talking about that yet.
Sure. And Shirley, what about from your side and the work that Pinson Masons are doing in this space?
Yeah, well, we've also done a hell of a lot. You know, diversity and inclusion is like really at the forefront of the firm, and we once we do, you know, we look to recruiters who make it their priority as well. And when people do start, we ensure that they have like D&I training, and also those involved in recruitment and promotions within the firm, they have to undergo mandatory training, which includes unconscious bias and diversity and equality. We also we sponsor events such as Diversity in Law, which is basically an event which encourages LGBT students and gives them advice how to get into the legal profession. And I also, volunteered at one of the events, and it was amazing that students, you know, these days, some of them didn't want their face to be shown, and, you know, they're worried about coming out, and they said, oh, I couldn't see myself being out in the workplace, and they're really flabbergasted by the amount of support and, you know, what firms do. So that's a really great initiative. We also do, we work with Stonewall in their Diversity Champions program, and we learn a lot from Stonewall as well to improve our training and learn from policy, you know, to improve our policies and make sure things are up to date. We can't just kind of put policies there and expect them still be valid 10 years later. We, you know, every year or 2 years, look at those policies and make sure that they're up to date. There's also for us to ensure that, you know, we get a broad range. Our network, our LGBT network, is really active and an allies network, and we run numerous events. I won't go into too much detail as well, like Al said. But internally as well, there's things like we have a confidential platform. So if people do have any grievances, they can confidentially contact them, and each one is investigated. And when our allies do sign up to our network, they, you know, actually sign a contract, so to speak, for an agreement to say that they won't put up with homophobic banter in the workplace, and, you know, will do everything they can to prevent bullying and harassment. So just small things like that, but a lot of things make the difference.
Yeah, no, indeed, absolutely. And I think it's really good shout out as well, like with the Stonewall and how they're really supportive with, you know, companies, and I think they've got a lot of great resources out there. So not only kind of the work we're actually doing within the IP profession with IP Out and the other IP inclusive kind of groups, but, you know, looking at the, you know, a broader picture as well. So no, I think that's great.
Absolutely, and that's how I became the kind of educational role model. It was, you know, we were holding the training at our in our conference rooms, you know, upstairs, and there was a place available. So kind of at the last minute, they said there's a place available. Anyone want to become a Stonewall, you know, education role model, and it will involve you going into schools and talking. And I was like, yeah, definitely, I'm in there. And it was definitely one of the best things I've done in the last few years. So I really enjoy it. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to go to schools of late, but schools I have been to, I learned a lot as well. But without my firm, I wouldn't have had that opportunity.
Sure, yeah. And I guess, so Al, like, if we do talk about a bit more about sort of the inclusion side of things and how we support that workforce in a sense. I guess one thing is obviously with the support networks and those aspects there. So do you want to talk a bit about your, you know, iPride and what you're doing at the UK IPA in that sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as Triona said, we work very closely with Stonewall and have done for quite a few years as well, which was sort of one of the catalysts, I think. The office brought in some D&I policies, but at that point there wasn't a lot behind it. So a few people, and it's always a few people that are prepared to be out in a workplace that isn't particularly friendly, decided to set up the network. I quite quickly got on board with it as well, because I could never be shut up on these issues. So I decided it was better to stop moaning and actually get involved, and then ended up being the co-chair because I don't shut up. So, but as it's gone on, we took a decision early on to make it LGBT plus and allies as one network group, so we don't distinguish between, because I'm talking to a few other organisations as part of my South Wales network chairs group that I'm on. We deal with lots of different sectors, and some sectors find it much more difficult to get people to come out in the workplace. And I think because we were at the beginning of trying to get people to be involved, it was easier to just do it as a sort of overall group. And it's worked really well, because people have come in to the group and no one asks, you know, are you an ally or are you LGBT? It doesn't matter. You're just part of the group and being involved in what we do. But then over time, then people have come out because they feel that the workplace makes things more comfortable. So that was the sort of starting the ball rolling. And then we've got some excellent people in HR on the D&I side who have then started initiating transitioning at work policies, adoption and fostering and childbirth policies that aren't gendered and, you know, hetero normative in the way that they're written. So they've all been changed to reflect that. And I think as that's our head of people who's on our board has just adopted a little boy with his husband. So we've got a lot more public awareness in the office of just, you know, the diversity of families and LGBT people, and nothing bad's happened, so people are less worried about it. So, and more people then have said, yeah, you know, I'm gay. We've had a few people lately come out who like to cross-dress, you know, and they've just said, well, I'm working at home, you know, I feel really stifled, so I just want to tell everyone about it. And that's been brilliant. I could never have envisaged that happening off the back of this. Since I came out as non-binary, which was terrifying to do that in the workplace, I've got 5 or 6 other people now I know of, both in the organisation and then even more outside the organisation, who've said, oh yeah, me as well. But I'm not comfortable talking about it yet. There's still a big stigma. And given what's happening externally in the media at the moment, I'm not surprised. So, you know, you're a target at the moment. So I'm happy to be a target. I'm gobby, but there are other people who are less so. So, and I've always been a target because of how I look anyway. So it's not new for me to be targeted. Whereas I think for people who don't want to be out at work, then it's easier to just keep quiet and not say anything. But I'm hoping that'll change. We have done a lot more work around non-binary and trans issues with Stonewall in the last few years. And I think we are making some real changes now and seeing the benefits of that. So hopefully that'll keep going. But I think the network was the start of it. But now we need to be more creative to widen things out a bit. And of course, we haven't been able to do any events because of COVID, which has made things really difficult. So a lot of our role has been supporting people who've been struggling more than doing the wider work that we would normally like to do. So it's been difficult. But without the network, we wouldn't have been able to support staff. So I'm really glad we had that. So that's been great.
Sure. And Sharon, I know you've spoken a bit about your support network, right, as well, that you've got at Pinson Masons.
Yeah, that's also very active. There's like 10% of our employees are part of the LGBT plus network and allies network. And exactly as Al says as well, the allies are just as important as the LGBT, you know, members, and everyone supporting each other. You know, at Pinson Masons as well, we have an annual conference, which is for everyone in the network, and our network is global as well. And we get people from other offices coming down to wherever it's based. And of course, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we didn't have one in person this year, but we had a virtual one, and we had like talked about intersectionality, and we had some global butterflies come in and talk about trans rights, and it was a really good day for everyone. And we have usually our conference ends with the LGBT film night, and even clients come to that, and it's always a big hit. This year we had a virtual Pride event actually because of the pandemic, and to be honest, I didn't have much expectations of it. I thought, okay, we're just gonna talk about being gay, but they had people from different offices all around the world, people from our Middle Eastern office where it's not legal to be gay, but we've got an embassy approach, so people in those offices can be out and proud at work and they're safe. And people from, say, the Middle East to Singapore to Australia to people from all of our different offices spoke about their coming out story, and it was really uplifting, actually, a really great event. So even that, it doesn't cost anything to do, but people felt much more uplifted and supported just hearing about other colleagues. Some people didn't realize they were gay, some people hadn't come out until very recently, and everyone's story is different, and we've all got a lot to learn from each other. So just these events throughout the year, and say National Coming Out Day, we'll do something, and Trans Awareness Day, just to spark people's mind as well. And we used to as well, we've done them virtually, but we'd have like LGBT kind of role models coming in to speak. We've had Lady Phil and Dr. Rand, the kids doctor, come in, and so it's been great to hear about them as well. We've also been involved in a program which helps our peers and our clients to help them with their inclusion and strategy. We've got a steering group, and they have gone to help our clients with their LGBT plus networks and inclusion strategies, which has been great that we've been able to help our clients as well. And it's not just about us.
Sure. Great, thank you. And so I guess if we then look at the profession and how we perhaps drive greater representation, right, in the workplace, and and how we hopefully we can see that increase it through the diversity survey. How do we support that? So perhaps Chris, how can ITPREG play a role in driving greater representation?
ITPREG, of course, can't and shouldn't dictate to firms what they can and can't do. What we can do, however, is encourage, and we can point to really good examples. We can tell people how important this is. We can promote diversity in all its aspects across the profession, and we very much want to do that over the next few years. To me, the four essential ingredients for any workplace, and both Al and Trina have touched on quite a bit of this already. The four essential ingredients are, in relation to diversity, firstly policies, secondly training, thirdly networks, and fourthly role models. And the policies bit is sort of the easiest of those to get right. But what you need to do is make sure that you have someone at board or partner level who is there to to champion the policies to ensure that they are being made real, rather than just something that's a very fine statement, but actually no real action happens as a result of it. Training, there's some very good training that is done. There's also some not so good training that is done, and getting it to be done regularly, to be done in a refreshing way from time to time, and to be of really good quality and to be impactful is important. Making sure that there is provision for networks in obviously not particularly possible in a very small firm, but in any larger firm, having an LGBTQ+ network can be completely transformative for the people working in that firm, because they will recognize there are other people like them, and that gives huge comfort and confidence to people. And ultimately, role models are really important. People who are themselves prepared to be out, and by showing that they are out, that they are proud, that that they can succeed along with being out and proud. There's nothing better than that for giving people real confidence. Now, in ITPREG, we can urge and advocate all of that. We can try, some of us, to be role models ourselves, but the work really needs to be done at individual firm level.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that role model part particularly is really important. And I remember writing an article for CITMA's review back in 2016, it's not even that long ago really, and being asked to write about the perspective of speaking out as a gay person. And I struggled. I was actually asked to write in collaboration with other trademark attorneys, and I couldn't actually find any. So I ended up having to write this piece on my own. And I actually remember Trioni emailing me afterwards, but about it. But I think it is absolutely right. And I think obviously you are a role model, right? You know, being the first openly gay, MP in 1984. And did you, when you made that decision in rugby and coming out, did you anticipate kind of that piece of being that role model and setting out to be as as you have done in your career?
The honest answer to that is no. I sort of thought I really want and need to do this for myself, but I also need and want to do it for establishing the principle for other people. I didn't dream that anyone would look to me as a role model at that point. But these things happen by accident, and across the whole profession, you will have people like Al and Trina who have become role models because that's how other people react to them, and that is incredibly important. I don't think anyone really sets out to be a role model. They sort of happen into it, and but that is a very important role. The other thing I should do is give a shout out to the work of IP Inclusive, who do a terrific amount across the whole profession. And they can provide that sort of networking ability where a lot of people in the profession work in very small firms or in single person practice. And and IP Inclusive can provide that networking opportunity for people in that sort of environment who aren't part of a big firm with the opportunity of having a network within the individual firm.
Thanks for highlighting that. We actually just got a question in about how smaller firms can, support their staff as well. And I think the IP Inclusive and the various committees thereof, including IP, I think do a really great job in supporting those individuals that perhaps are in small companies that don't necessarily have all of these sort of same resources. I guess like another point really is like what can firms do to ensure they're not, that their support of the community isn't just lip service, right? They're not just ticking a box. It's it's more authentic in that way. And Al, Triona, what do you think around this sort of lip service aspect?
Triona, do you want to go first, or shall I?
Yeah, I can. I think it's really important because actually at a firm that I did work at, they had actually paid to get support from Stonewall, but they hadn't done anything to set up a network or done anything, to support the LGBT members of staff. And it became apparent to me, and that was one of the reasons why I wasn't out as well, because there was no role models there at the time. I wasn't aware. It turned out there was someone senior, and me and him were in the process of about to kind of set up a LGBT group. But I think it's it is very important that people do feel supported. And I think for a small organization, like you say, if there's only say 50 in an organization or 20 and there's only 1 or 2 gay people, I mean, that is also proof that you do need an allies network. Like at Pinsent Masons, it was actually a straight ally with 2 other gay people who set up the network initially, and he contacted me when I joined the LGBT network. He sent an email to me like, welcome to the firm, and I'm a straight ally. And I was like, why is he contacting me? And I realized afterwards that he is instrumental in driving that network and why we became #1 in the Stonewall Index, and he still is heavily involved. And senior management, there's also some straight allies. The senior partner here, Richard Foley, he's at every single event that we have, and to show that he's also a role model and to show his support. I think for straight allies, it's instrumental, because especially in smaller organizations, you can't do it on your own. If you're only 2-3 people, then there's only so much you can do. You need the support of a bigger network, and only when straight allies are part of your community, then you can make a change together.
Thank you. Al?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Even as a government organisation that's not that small, we joined up with a few other people when we were first starting out. We were linked up with the Stats Office, who were next door to us, because at that point they had a really buoyant network and we didn't have one. So we worked with Spectrum for a while, which was their organisation, and then decided to set up our own, and it sort of snowballed from there. But yeah, working with others, and IP Inclusive certainly is really great for small IP firms. We've had this conversation, I think, on the IP Out committee quite a bit, because a lot of firms are quite small and you might only have 1 or 2 people, but it's a good way in. But you will, I think, with any firm or organisation, people will see through it really quickly if you don't mean it. As soon as someone gets bullied, or there's a bit of banter and it isn't dealt with, or you want to foster or adopt or transition and there are no policies, it becomes apparent really quickly if it's not backed up. As Triona said, the Stonewall example is a really good one, because I've dealt with quite a few and met quite a few people over the years who've said, oh, my organisation is signed up to Stonewall, but they don't really mean it, and you hear that a few times. Not so much in the legal profession, that's more in other sectors, but you definitely hear it. And I think staff know, they're going to know as soon as it's not actually a genuine commitment, it's just ticking a box. It becomes quite apparent. The whole culture of that organisation has to be inclusive day to day in everything. Otherwise people will know that it isn't. And you've got to keep reasserting it, because there will be kickback. There always is. There will always be people that aren't happy with a business or an organisation that's got a strong D&I agenda. So you have to keep reasserting that, you know, we protect all of our staff regardless of characteristic. People can be who they are at work. You've got to keep reinforcing that message, mutual respect for each other all the time. And if you don't, people will see through it pretty quickly. And also, you won't get as many clients, you won't get as many people, you know, through your recruitment. So I think years ago, someone told me that millennials, and I know that's going back a bit now, 86% of them look at a D&I record of a company before they actually apply to join that company. And I know we've got people, staff in the office, younger staff who came in as apprentices and things, and they only applied to us because of our Stonewall position on the index, because they were really pleased about our D&I record. So, you know, those sorts of things work both ways. They help the staff who are there, but they also help the organisation as well to attract more people, more diverse people. So it's a two-way street, but I think you'll soon get found out if you don't mean it.
Yeah, so great point. We've got a question in. Regarding people still in the closet within the workplace, what are your thoughts on those people that are less apparently LGBTQ+? So, for example, someone in a same-sex relationship may find it easier to come out than someone who is in a bi or pan in their relationship, or someone who's asexual. What do you think of the benefits of those people coming out, and can you suggest any ideas on how to do so?
Let me have a go first at that. I have always felt that that it is up to any individual to make their own decision about when they want to say something to the wider world about themselves. For the rest of us, we need to make it as easy for them to make that decision as we possibly can. And just going back to the rather crucial word that Al used earlier on, that word of culture, because it's the culture of the workplace, the culture of the firm that will determine whether someone is going to feel confident enough to say something about themselves. And yes, it is probably now easier for someone who is either in or wants to be in a same-sex relationship, probably easier for them to talk about themselves than someone who may be non-binary or trans or asexual or pansexual. It's because wider society has, I think, come to a greater degree of acceptance about same-sexness than they yet have over trans and non-binary people, and that will change over time. Acceptance will grow, but we're not there yet. So it probably does take more courage for someone to come out in that way than even for those of us who have same-sex relationships. The task for everyone else, whether straight or not, is to make sure that the culture of the firm is as welcoming, as inclusive, as warm as possible, so that people do feel able to say something about themselves, perhaps in a very small way at first to just a few people, but then gradually to the wider range of people in the firm.
Great answer. Training out, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Otherwise, I have another question or comment.
I was just going to say, for me, I think bisexual is to sexuality what non-binary is to gender. They're always the forgotten bit. And it tends to happen on my partner's bisexual and she's always going on about it. But we've done a lot of work, certainly at IPO, because we've got a lot of bisexual staff, some of whom are married to women with husbands, some are in same-sex marriages, etc. And I just think, as Chris said, if you've got the right culture, then you should, encourage people to be open about who they are. But equally, the rest of us could do well not to assume anything about anybody, and that's a good starting point. And I'm as guilty as anyone else. I catch myself so often going, "Oh God, you shouldn't have just presumed that. That's really awful." But if we do that and don't presume and let people tell you in their own time their experiences, because not everybody that's in a same-sex relationship will have always been in same-sex relationships, and the same the other way around. And you can't presume about anyone's gender identity either. So if you create that environment where people feel comfortable, then they're more likely to talk about it. And certainly that's what we're finding at the IPO now, that far more people are prepared to talk about all diversity, not just LGBT plus issues, but much more widely, things that are bothering them or things that are their day-to-day reality and the people don't know about. So it's definitely, the culture is it, really.
Sure. So I've got another question here, or comment even. So when will the UK IPO stop sending letters to patent and trademark applicants or their representatives that begin with "Dear Sir" or "Madam"? And will they start using non-binary?
We're looking at it. It's much easier on the application side because you can say "Dear applicant." It can be a lot more difficult on my side of the house when we're dealing with inter-parties issues, because you don't always know until the proceedings are joined who the parties are, so that gets a bit more complicated. But yes, we've already adopted non-gender specific language for all our policies internally. We've also done it for the MOP, so for the Manual of Patent Practice. We're in the process of looking at trademarks and designs, but they've got to be radically changed in many ways anyway. So that'll come in as part of that project, as I'm sure anyone who practices in the trademark and designs area will know, as I do. So all of that guidance is ripe for updating anyway. But the office is currently undergoing the transformation project, which I'm part of on the legal side, but also obviously feeding in from all of the iPride stuff as well. So I've got two hats, well actually three, because I'm a union as well. So I've got three hats on for my transformation work to make sure there's no discrimination, no issues with LGBT stuff, and that it's legally correct. So yeah, it's a long project. It is ongoing. But genuinely, if people notice things that they have an issue with, get in touch with me, and I will log these as things that we need to look at, because we are actually looking at everything in the office at the moment in terms of guidance. There will be, I suggest, maybe a few little legislative tweaks here and there come in the future as well, but probably a few years off yet. But we're looking at all of that. So if people have issues with any of those things, by all means, let me know. I'm happy to note them and change them. But in terms of the letters, I'm really glad that's been mentioned, because that's a bugbear of mine and has been for a long time. So my kayak club can write to me in a non-gendered way, so I'm quite sure that the IPO can get it sorted out in the 21st century. So apologies to anyone that's been offended, and it's not me, honestly.
I think it's a really good point that perhaps even I haven't really thought about that before. And even when you're writing, even as firms, and we're writing sometimes to the other side, and we, sometimes we'll take that tone as well. So I think it's a good point to raise. So thank you for that. Another question we've had, and it's to Triana and I actually, but you have both noted that there must be other gay trademark attorneys, but you haven't heard about them or couldn't find them. I'm wondering how you are expecting to find other gay people when sexuality or of any flavour isn't typically in the professional public domain. Even if someone is out in their firm, external people wouldn't necessarily know about it. I'm happy to answer that, but Triana, do you have any So I think from my side anyway, I think it's a really good point, right? You know, I don't think there's an expectation that on LinkedIn you have a big pride flag or put it out there, but I think it's that point that I think back in 2016 when I wrote that article, I mean, IP Inclusive had just been launched and IPL and the committees were still in their infancy or hadn't even been launched, and so I think it was about, and again, I was actually working at that time for a company. I was working for Harley Davidson, and there wasn't an IP support network, LGBTQ plus networks there, and so for me it was about looking at externally in the profession and going, okay, well, people like me, kind of how do I find them? And I think IPL has added to that, really. And I was actually involved in Interlaw, which had launched, you know, in 2008, and again, I was the only IP lawyer going to those. So I don't think there's an expectation that people have to be publicly out in their professional lives, and I think as long as you can be your authentic self and you feel like that, I think that's important. But I think it was about, at that point in time, there wasn't a way to really find your community. You know, you could do it in many other ways, but not within the profession. And I thought that was a shame that there wasn't that area. So I think that's what I meant by my comment anyway. Yeah. Shireen, anything else?
I completely agree, Mark, and I think, you know, events like these and the point of IP Out and other committees is that so people don't feel alone. You know, we're not saying everyone should be out, and surely there's way more out there. We just want people, those who are out and want to be, you know, just want to know that there's networks there and support if they're having trouble coming out at work, if they feel like they're the only person, you know, they want some support. You know, there are people here, and there's now organizations and networks available, which, like you say, even 5 years ago didn't exist, and times are changing and in a positive way.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It will get much better, I think, when we can once again have gatherings in person rather than across a screen. Things like the events that that IP Out put on are really good opportunities for finding other fellow souls who have gone through the same experiences, who have some of the same concerns, who may, in some instances, work in the same firm, but you had no idea that they were there.
Absolutely. I'm still looking forward to my IP Out colleagues. I've been on the committee for 2.5-ish years, and I've only ever seen Fiona in 2 dimensions. So.
Absolutely.
And I'm conscious of time. I think we actually have to wrap up now. We have no more questions. So I think with that, I will bring this panel to a close. But I just want to thank each of you individually for your contributions today. I've really loved hosting it. I think it's been really fun and really informative as well. So thank you all for this, and thank you for everyone who joined the panel today, the webinar, and I hope you've found this helpful. And I'd like to wish you all happy Pride.
Happy Pride, and thank you, Mark. Thanks, everyone.